For 3 years, they only existed to each other inside a courtroom. Then their flight was delayed 6 hours, and there was nothing left to stand behind.
I should start by telling you what he was to me before he was anything else, which is the opposing counsel. In family law, which is the area I practice, the opposing counsel occupies a specific role in your professional life that is unlike most other adversarial relationships. You see them repeatedly, across different cases, sometimes across years. You come to know their style, how they argue, what they push on, where they tend to give ground. You develop a kind of professional intimacy that has nothing warm about it, and is nonetheless intimate because you have watched each other perform under pressure and know with precision what the other person is capable of. It is, in its way, one of the most thorough ways to know someone. You have seen them at their most precise and their most resourceful, and occasionally, in the difficult cases, their most human. You have seen what they do when a case goes wrong, and what they do when it goes right. You have seen them be fair when they didn't have to be, and argue hard when it mattered, and occasionally make mistakes that they corrected with the specific grace of someone who cares more about getting it right than about being seen to be right. What you haven't seen is any of the rest of them. What you haven't had is a conversation that wasn't structured by the case. What you don't know is anything about who they are outside the thing you've been watching them do. Daniel Avery and I had been on opposite sides for 3 years. 14 cases, if I counted correctly, though I had not counted them deliberately. I knew the number the way you know the number of times you've had a particular conversation, because it's left a mark each time. We were not the only 2 family law attorneys in the city, but we were, for reasons of caseload and client networks, frequently the 2 family law attorneys across the table from each other, and we had spent 3 years being excellent at our jobs in direct opposition to each other. And neither of us had ever let it be anything other than that. He was good. That is the first honest thing I can say about Daniel Avery, and it costs me something to say it. Because in the particular accounting of a legal career, admitting that your most frequent opposing counsel is good is the same as admitting that your wins against him mean something, and your losses do too. He was methodical, precise, and had the specific quality of someone who understood that family law is not primarily about law. It's about people in the worst moments of their lives who need to be handled carefully even when the argument requires otherwise. He never lost sight of that. I noticed it from the beginning, and it complicated my professional opinion of him in ways I preferred not to think about. We were scrupulously civil. We were not friendly. The distinction mattered to both of us, and we maintained it across 14 cases with the mutual discipline of 2 people who understand the same rules and have agreed, without ever discussing it, to abide by them. The flight was to a conference in Denver. We had both been presenting, different panels, different days, and we were both booked on the same return flight on a Thursday evening, which neither of us had known until we arrived at the gate and found each other standing there with our bags and our boarding passes and the particular blankness of 2 people who have run out of professional context. "Avery," I said. "Caldwell," he said. We had never used first names. Then the board updated. Delayed. New departure 11:45 p.m. It was 5:53 in the evening. 6 hours. We looked at the board. We looked at each other. And something happened in that moment that I am still, months later, not sure I can describe accurately. Some small shift in the specific gravity of the situation. Some recognition that the rules we'd been operating under for 3 years had just been suspended, and that we were going to have to figure out, in the next 6 hours, what the rules were without them. We did not immediately sit together. That felt important to establish. We were adults who happened to be at the same gate with a 6-hour delay, and there was no professional obligation and no social obligation, and the airport was large enough that we could have distributed ourselves comfortably with minimal overlap for the duration. I found a seat near the window. He found a seat near the charging stations. We were approximately 40 feet apart, which was further than across a courtroom table, and closer than I'd ever been to Daniel Avery without a case between us. I opened my laptop. I was aware in the specific way you're aware of things you're trying not to be aware of, that he was 40 feet away and had also opened his laptop, and that we were both doing an excellent impression of two people who had not noticed each other. This lasted about 45 minutes. Then the airport restaurant nearest the gate began to fill up, and I calculated that if I waited another hour, I would be eating a sad sandwich alone at the gate, and I packed my laptop and went to the restaurant. And when I got there, the only open seat at the bar was next to Daniel Avery, who was already there with a drink and his own laptop, and looked up when I sat down with the expression of a man who had run the same calculation and arrived 4 minutes earlier. "Caldwell," he said. "I'm not sitting next to you professionally," I said, setting my bag down. "I want that established." "Noted," he said. "I'm not sitting next to you professionally either. We're just two people at an airport bar, with a 6-hour delay, in which we happen to be seated adjacently, due to circumstance. Entirely due to circumstance." The bartender came. I ordered. Daniel Avery's drink was something amber with ice, which I did not remark on. He did not remark on my order. We opened our respective laptops, adjacently due to circumstance, and for about 20 minutes we actually worked, which I found both professionally admirable and faintly absurd. Then he closed his laptop. I kept mine open for another 5 minutes, on principle. Then I closed it. "How was your panel?" he said. "Good. Yours?" "Fine. The Q&A ran long." They always run long at these things. Someone always wants to argue with the premise. Someone always does. We were talking about a conference panel the way colleagues talk about conference panels, which we were. Colleagues of a sort, the adversarial kind. And it was completely ordinary and also not ordinary at all, because in 3 years we had never had a conversation that wasn't about a case, and this was not about a case, and the absence of a case between us was taking up its own space at the bar. "What was your panel on?" I said, because a topic was better than the absence of one. "Mediation as a first resort rather than a last one. The argument that most family cases that go to litigation shouldn't." Interesting position for a litigator to take. I'm a litigator who's been in enough litigation to have opinions about when it's necessary and when it isn't. Fair enough. Mine was on evidence standards in custody determinations, specifically what counts as material change in circumstances, and whether current practice is consistent with what the standard is supposed to do. He looked at me with the expression I recognize from pre-trial hearings, the slight sharpening of attention that meant the topic was one he had thoughts about. And I think current practice has drifted. I think we apply a higher bar than the standard technically requires, and I think we do it because judges are risk-averse and the higher bar feels safer, but what it actually does is trap people in arrangements that no longer serve anyone. We had an argument about something adjacent to that, the Harmon case, 2 years ago. I remember the Harmon case. You thought I was applying too high a standard. You were. You won. I did. He almost smiled. You usually do, he said, when you're right, which is, I'll admit, more often than I find convenient. I looked at him. In 3 years, he had never said anything like that, conceded anything outside the specific legal requirements of a proceeding. We had been scrupulously civil. We had not been generous. That's the most generous thing you've ever said to me, I said. We're not in court. No, different rules. Or rather, no rules, which is its own thing. I thought about that. No rules. 3 years of precisely defined rules about how to address each other, what to say, what not to say, what the conversation was for. And now 6 hours with none of them. "What do we talk about," I said, "when there's no case?" "I have no idea," he said. "I was hoping you did." "I don't." "Then I suppose we find out." The bartender came by again. We both ordered without discussing it. Neither of us made a move to leave. By the second drink, which happened, and I am not going to pretend it happened entirely due to circumstance because we had both ordered them with full awareness of what we were doing, the conversation had moved past the conference. He had grown up in Ohio. I had not known that. There was no professional reason to know it, and it's not the kind of thing that comes up in pre-trial motions, and yet here it was, as a fact. Ohio, specifically Cleveland, specifically the east side of Cleveland, in a house his parents still lived in and which he still went back to twice a year. "You go back twice a year," I said. "Christmas and summer, my mother insists." "Mine too," I said, though mine has given up on summer and now just does Christmas with the full weight of expectation compressed into 3 days. "That sounds efficient." "It's terrifying." He smiled, which I had seen him do across a courtroom, the brief, restrained smile that was his tell when he thought he'd made a good point and was being disciplined about not showing it. This was different. This was just a smile, not at a point, at something I'd said. I noted the difference and said nothing about it. "Can I ask you something," he said, "that is genuinely not about any current or pending case?" "You can try." "Why family law?" I looked at him. "That's your question?" "It's what I'm curious about." "Most people ask that and mean it as a slight," I said. "Like, why would you choose the most emotionally brutal area of practice?" "I don't mean it as a slight. I'm in it too." "You are?" I thought about it. My parents divorced when I was 11. It was not handled well. The legal part, I mean. The attorneys were adversarial in a way that made everything worse, and I remember thinking, at 11, that the people who were supposed to help were making it harder. I went into it because I wanted to be the attorney I would have wanted my parents to have. He was quiet for a moment. "That's a good reason. What's yours?" "Similar," he said. "Not divorce, but I had a custody situation in my family, an aunt. It dragged on for 2 years and nobody was well served by it. I understood watching it that the process could be made either better or worse by the people running it, and that seemed like something worth doing something about." I looked at him. 3 years across courtroom tables, and I had not known this. He had not known mine. We had known everything about each other's professional technique and nothing about what had built it. "You're good," I said, which came out more directly than I'd intended. He looked at me. "At?" "The job. You're good at it. I've thought that for a long time, and it seems strange that I've never said it." "We're opposing counsel," he said. It would be somewhat irregular to say it during a hearing. "It would. For what it's worth," he said carefully, "you're the best opposing counsel I've had, in terms of making me work, keeping me honest. I've won cases against you, and I've lost cases to you, and the distinction has always felt meaningful, which is not true of everyone I've faced." I sat with that for a moment. In the specific accounting of a legal career, this was a considerable thing to say. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome." The bartender came by. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The airport moved around us. Announcements, rolling luggage, the particular suspended quality of a place full of people waiting to be somewhere else. And we were at the bar in the middle of it, and it felt, strangely, like one of the quieter places I'd been in a while. By the 3rd hour, we had moved from the bar to a table because the bar had filled up, and also because the bar stools were not designed for long occupancy, and we both understood, without discussing it, that we were in this for the duration. The table was small, near a window that looked out onto the tarmac. planes moving slowly in the dark, their lights blinking in patterns that were almost meditative if you let yourself look at them. We didn't look at them much. The conversation had found a shape by then, and we were inside it. We talked about cases, not our cases, not anything pending, but the kind of cases that stay with you, the ones that cost something. He had a case from early in his career, a child custody situation where the outcome had been legally correct and humanly wrong, and he talked about it with the specific care of someone who has thought about it many times and has not stopped finding it difficult. I had one too. Different facts, same quality of difficulty. And I told it in more detail than I would usually tell anyone, because he understood the particular thing it was difficult to explain to people outside the work. Outside the work, most people hear family law and imagine drama. Courtroom confrontations, tearful testimonies, the theatrical version of it they've seen in films. The reality is different. The reality is two parents who cannot be in the same room, and a child who knows it. And a process that is supposed to help and sometimes does and sometimes makes everything worse, and two attorneys on either side whose job is to represent their client and whose other job, the one nobody assigns but which exists anyway, is to not lose sight of the human dimension of it. The best attorneys in family law are the ones who can do both simultaneously. Who can argue hard for their client and still understand that the person across the table is not the enemy. They are another professional trying to do the same difficult thing. Daniel Avery was the best opposing counsel I'd faced because he understood both jobs. He never let the argument become personal. He never used the client's pain as a rhetorical weapon when a clear legal point would serve. And he was consistently, scrupulously honest. Not just honest in the way the bar requires, but honest in the way that meant if there was information that complicated his case, he dealt with it directly, rather than trying to bury it. You notice these things across 14 cases. You develop a precise sense of who someone is professionally in the way you can't develop in most other contexts. Because most other contexts don't show you someone performing under genuine pressure, with real stakes, over a long period of time. I had a very precise sense of who Daniel Avery was professionally. It turned out, across the table at the airport in the third hour, that I had had no idea who he was as a person, and the person was, unexpectedly, someone I would have wanted to know. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" he said. "Sometimes. Do you?" "Sometimes. But then I think about what else I would do and I can't get past it. The work matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Yes. The cases where I've done something that actually helped, where the outcome was right, not just legally right, but actually the better outcome for the people, those are the ones that make the rest of it make sense. "I know exactly what you mean." "I know you do," he said. "I've watched you work, Caldwell. You care about it. It shows." I looked at him. He said it simply, as a fact, the way he argued. No performance, no flourish, just the thing as he saw it. "So do you," I said. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Here is what I want to tell you about that third hour, in the airport, at the table. It was the first time in 3 years that I felt the weight of what we'd been doing across from each other. Not adversarially. I mean the weight of two people who had been in the same room for the same purpose for 3 years and had been so focused on the case between them that they had never looked up. We'd been looking at the same things and never at each other. And now there was no case, and we were looking at each other. And what was there was not what I had expected. What was there was someone I recognized. Not personally, I had not known him personally, but recognizably. Someone who had come to the same work the same way and cared about it the same way and had been carrying it the same way across the table from me for 3 years. The 4th hour is the one I've thought about the most since. Not because anything dramatic happened in it. Nothing did. But because it was the hour in which the conversation stopped being about the work and became about something else, without either of us deciding to change it. It just shifted, the way conversations shift when the surface runs out and you find yourself at a different depth without quite knowing when you crossed over. He asked me about the city, where I lived, how long, whether I'd meant to stay this long, or whether it had just happened, the way things happen when you build a life somewhere and then can't quite locate the right moment to leave. The second one, I said. I came for a clerkship and stayed because the work was good, and then stayed because I'd built something, and then stopped asking the question, do you like it? Most of the time. I thought about it. I like what I've made of it. The work, the practice, the people I know here. Whether I like the city itself as a place, I think I've stopped being able to separate that from the life in it. That might be what liking a place actually is. Maybe. I looked at him. What about you? You're not from here originally. No, I came for a firm and stayed because the firm was good, and then the firm wasn't as good anymore, and by then I was established enough that leaving seemed harder than staying. Do you think about leaving? He considered it. Sometimes, less than I used to. What changed? He looked at me for a moment. Different question, he said. Fair enough. No, I'll answer it, he said. I think I stopped thinking about leaving as much when I stopped thinking of where I was as temporary. When I started, I don't know the right word, investing maybe, in the place as a permanent thing rather than a current thing. What made you invest? Time, mostly. And the realization that I was waiting for something to be different, and it wasn't going to be different. It was just going to be what it was, and I could be in it, or I could spend my life waiting for the version I'd imagined. I looked out at the tarmac, the planes moving slowly in the dark, their lights steady and unhurried. I've been waiting for something too, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. I don't know exactly what. Something to feel settled, like the current arrangement is the arrangement. Does it not feel settled? The work does. The work feels exactly right. And the rest of it? The rest of it is, I have a good life. I want to be clear about that. I'm not dissatisfied. I just sometimes think I've been so focused on building one specific thing that I've been a bit adjacent to the rest. Adjacent to what? To being present in it, I said. In the life, as opposed to the career inside the life. He was quiet for a moment. I know what that's like, he said. I spent a long time with that arrangement. Very good at the work. Reasonably competent at the rest of it. Not sure the two things were as connected as they should have been. What changed it? I started paying attention, he said, to the things outside the work, deliberately. It felt artificial at first, then it didn't. What kinds of things? The usual kinds. Friends, the city, making time for things that didn't have an outcome attached to them. That last one is hard. Very hard, he agreed. I'm still not great at it, but I'm better than I was. I looked at him across the airport table. 4 hours into a conversation we hadn't planned, in an airport, with 2 hours left. Is this, I gestured vaguely at the table, the airport, the situation, an example of that? Things without an outcome attached? He looked at me for a moment with the expression I'd come to recognize as his actual smile rather than the professional one. Slower, less restrained. I think it might have an outcome, he said. I'm just not specifying it in advance. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. If we weren't opposing counsel, if we'd met somewhere else, some other context, what do you think? I stopped. He was looking at me steadily. I think, he said, that we would have had this conversation a long time ago. The airport announcement came on. Gate change, not ours. The noise settled back. We're having it now, I said. We are. 3 hours left. 3 hours, he said. That's enough time. For what? He looked at me for a moment. For the rest of this conversation, he said, and to figure out what comes after it. I want to tell you about the last hour before the flight because I think it's the part that matters most, even though nothing dramatic happened in it. We had talked for 5 hours about the work, about where we'd come from, about what we were good at and what we found hard, about the conference and the city and a book I'd mentioned that he'd read and had thoughts about, a history of the adversarial legal system that argued its current form was neither inevitable nor optimal, which we disagreed about in a way that was easy and unguarded, in a way that 3 years of opposing counsel had never been. At some point, we had ordered food and eaten it without stopping talking, which I don't think either of us noticed until the plates were gone. At some point, the airport had quieted. The earlier rush of delayed passengers settling into their long waits, the noise level dropping to something more ambient, just the background hum of a large building at night. What I noticed in that last hour was a specific quality of the conversation, not what we were saying. The content had moved around enough by then that I couldn't have summarized it linearly. What I noticed was the ease of it, the absence of the particular vigilance I maintained in professional settings, the constant low-level monitoring of what I said and how I said it and what impression it made. It was gone. I was not monitoring anything. I was just in the conversation, fully. The way you're in a conversation with someone who doesn't require you to manage them. I had not realized until it was absent how much energy I spent on that management in professional contexts. In court, obviously, that's the job. But in professional social settings too. In the conference dinners and the networking receptions and the collegial interactions that are supposed to feel easy, but carry their own set of invisible rules. I have been spending a great deal of energy for 3 years on being a certain way around Daniel Avery. Not performing exactly, just maintained. The last hour felt like setting something down. I have a conflict on the Hartley case, he said at some point in that last hour, quietly, carefully. I need to disclose it and step down. It'll be reassigned. Okay. Which means we won't be on opposite sides of Hartley. I understand. I'm telling you because it changes things, professionally. I looked at him. Is that why you're telling me? No, he said. I'm telling you because I've been thinking for the last 5 hours about what comes after this conversation, and I didn't want there to be anything I hadn't said that I should have. Which was a very careful, very deliberate thing to say, which was very Daniel Avery. Avery, I said. Caldwell. We've been using last names for 3 years, I've noticed. My first name is Kate. He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, just the specific small thing of a door opening that had been closed for a long time. Daniel, he said, I know your name. I know, I just wanted to say it, like this, not across a table with a file between us. We sat for a moment in the particular quality of a name said plainly, just as itself, after years of the formal version. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The gate agent's voice came over the speaker. Final boarding call. We gathered our things and joined the line and boarded the plane and found our seats. Not together, different rows, because neither of us had known we'd need to sit together when we'd booked the flight. He was 3 rows behind me. Just before the doors closed, my phone buzzed. A text from the number on the business card he'd slid across the airport table sometime in hour 4, when we'd been looking something up and he'd used his phone and then set it on the table between us without making anything of it. The text said, "Drinks, next week, not professional." I looked at my phone for a moment. Outside the window, the runway lights were moving. "Tuesday," I wrote. He replied, "Tuesday." Here is what I think about when I think about the 6-hour delay. I think about how many times we had been in the same room before that evening. 14 cases, pre-trial hearings, depositions, mediations, probably 40 or 50 times in various configurations across 3 years. 40 or 50 times in the same room, and we had never once had a conversation that wasn't structured by the case. The case was always between us, not as a barrier exactly, more as a frame. It told us who we were to each other and what the conversation was for and where it ended. It was a useful frame professionally. It was also, I understand now, the thing that made it possible to be in the same room 40 times and never look up. The delay took the frame away. 6 hours with no case between us, nothing to argue about, no client to represent, no file to look at. Just 2 people who had been looking at the same things for 3 years, finally looking at each other. I've thought about what would have happened without the delay. Whether we would have found our way to Tuesday eventually, through some other means, some other accident of circumstance. I don't know. Maybe. Probably not in the same way. Not with 5 hours of conversation already between us. Not with the specific quality of having talked until the flight was called and not wanting to stop. Daniel says, he says this sometimes, when one of us has a good day in court, when something works the way it should, that the best arguments are the ones that are true. Not just legally sound, true. The ones where the facts and the feeling are the same thing, and you don't have to perform the conviction because you have it. I think about that, applied to other things. I think about the airport bar and the table and the last hour and the text that said not professional, and the Tuesday that followed it and the Tuesdays after that. I think about what it means to say a true thing to someone who understands why it's true. I think 3 years was a long time to be in the same room and not say the true thing. I think 6 hours was enough.